Hey, good morning, everybody. It is, what is it? It's May 28th. Oh, and look at that. See, that's what happens when you try things for the first time on stream. I did not realize that was going to loop. But in any case, welcome to the Dev Talk Show. And we're going to try to do something pretty quick this morning. We only have about an hour before stand-up. And those of you who have been watching the Odyssey of Blazor Authentication will see that what we're going to try to do is work on the Blazor WebAssembly from scratch repo and see if we can add authentication to Blazor WebAssembly. I'm not sure if I said that right a second ago, the Blazor AuthFromScratch repo. So setting expectations for this, if you're watching in the future and you say, hey, I see this is, approximately an hour long, is that this is not a tutorial episode by any means. So I don't have a script here and I don't have an end product that I'm positive we're going to get to. But I do believe that based on what we did on our last stream, that we should be able to add WebAssembly support for the Blazor Auth-from-scratch repository. There's a couple other things we want to tackle on the show going forward. Certainly, a lot of people have asked in the comments about JWT support and have definitely been looking into that. It's just so strange in some respects that I don't feel like it's something that you see in a lot of documentation. And, there's a lot of debate. I want to use that word very carefully. I think when I watch a lot of different talks and the way people are approaching this on YouTube, I'm seeing folks that really are pushing against having that access token or that refresh token down in your browser. And then other folks are saying, hey, look, as long as you're using something like the auth code with Pixie, PKCE workflow, then I might have said those letters in the correct order, then you're fine. And in other cases, it has been, hey, why don't you embed this in a strict HTTPS cookie? So there's a lot to tackle there. And then the question is, now how do you do that with ASP.NET? And another great question that someone asked about was, we've shown how you can have external login support with in the documentation. They show off Microsoft support, Google support. I want to say that there's Twitter and Facebook in there. But it turns out there's this entire repo that I'm happy to show all of you with all kinds of providers. And we'll have to make sure that we add this to the show notes as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's go ahead and get started here. And what I really want is I want it to look like this. Maybe that'll be good enough for today. Do we get a little bit more screen real estate if I switch to this one? I don't know. It seems like it's about the same. So I don't know that it matters that much. But in any case, when we take a look here, I wanted to show this particular repository. It's an ASP.NET-contrib, and it's ASP.NET Security OAuth providers. And this particular group of providers, you can get them all on NuGet. And so I'm going to go ahead and let NuGet.org open. And you can see ASP.NET Contrib has a whole lot of stuff going on here, including packages for Apple authentication, GitHub authentication, LinkedIn authentication, Instagram, Discord, Twitch. Like it just keeps going, right? Some of these are even deprecated, right? Like Beam, Reddit, Yammer, Patreon, Vimeo. So if you want to have authentication for a lot of these different scenarios, here's a GitHub repository that is doing this. And the reason I bring this up is I think it's important to answer this question this way. The question was, the person was surprised to see that they felt like, why isn't there direct support for OpenID Connect? It seems like you only have support for specific providers. And it turns out that if you dive into the source code a little bit, like for example, what we are looking at now in this repository is the GitHub section and the GitHub authentication extensions. And so when you're looking in these extensions, way at the bottom, I have a extension method, add GitHub, that calls add OAuth. This is the core extension method that sets up authentication for an OpenID Connect or an OAuth scenario. But you have to fill out this authentication options data structure and this authentication handler data structure. And if you've been watching our shows, you may have some familiarity with this now, because we've talked about things like schemes and we've talked about configuration in the external providers. So you have to fill this out correctly. And so what this particular library and these various extension methods are doing is they're helping you fill that out without having to know the nitty gritty of OIDC. So if you need to implement your own OAuth provider, perhaps you have your own provider that's not going to be in here, but you need to connect to it. It could be something corporate, it could be something in your enterprise. Perhaps it's a provider that you're using for authentication throughout your enterprise. Then this is where we need to go. And so that's another great future show, is saying, how do you implement that from scratch? I definitely want to say hi to Zig, who was kind enough to say hello. Thank you for joining us this morning. Definitely appreciate it. And then we also have a entry here from our co-host Rich Ross, who couldn't be here this morning. And if folks are wondering, haven't had shows the last couple of days, you may still hear it a little bit in my voice, is I actually lost my voice late last week when I wanted to do this specific show. And so I realized, wow, it's going to be very difficult to do this until I get some semblance of reasonable talking back. And it sounds like this morning I thought I was doing okay, even sort of like trying to talk out loud. But now that I'm sitting here, I realize, oh, I still have a lot of this scratch going on. So I hopefully we can fight through that, and everybody can still enjoy the show today. So let's take a quick peek at where we are. And the way I'm going to do that is we're looking at a blank Windows desktop. That's great. Let's go to github.com and we're going to go to the TheDevTalkShow, where, if you aren't familiar, we have a Blazor AuthFromScratch repository. Now, this repository needs a little work. There's no doubt about it. We currently just have the one source file in here. That's it. And it's just simply, it's probably not the way we really want to do this long term. We probably want to break this out. So let's, because one of the things that we're going to find is that the server side code is easier than adding support to a Blazor WebAssembly application. We're not even going to talk about InteractiveAuto today. And the reason is if you watched our last show, we looked at the persistent state providers, and these providers are responsible for when authentication is changing on the server side. They essentially update a persistent state container of sorts. We'll look at that. And that's how the WebAssembly side knows who's logged in. I want you to note that the WebAssembly side does not actually do the authorization, or the authentication, I should say. Let's not talk about the authorization. It doesn't actually do the authentication. That has to happen on the server side. There's no way for a disconnected client app to, in a trusted way, do authentication. Or when I say do, I mean complete the authentication process with a provider that's online. And in fact, you want to be careful about having your client-side code handle that at all, and be the authority, so to speak, for whether you are logged in, because client-side code is in your user's browser. It's in your user's mobile device. The user can modify it even ever so slightly and run their own custom version of your app, if you will, on their own device. And they can just say, yeah, sure, I'm logged in. And if your servers are going to trust that, then you have a problem in that your servers are going to trust that, and perhaps important trusted data goes where it should go. So here's the Blazor AuthFromScratch repository. Let's see what we can bring up here in terms of our Windows terminal. This happens to be PowerShell, and this is PowerShell. I don't really think it's called PowerShell Core anymore, but note that I don't tend to use Windows PowerShell. So here's Windows PowerShell in my terminal. I don't use this. In fact, as you can see, it doesn't even seem to start correctly. So I obviously haven't been in here a while. I tend to do everything in either PowerShell or if I'm feeling nostalgic, I'll go to command prompt. But I've been playing with the my terminal the last couple of days. In fact, I just installed in WSL. I just installed Ubuntu 24.04. So I swapped out what was in here for a long time, which was 20 maybe it was 04. I don't know for sure, but it was Ubuntu 20, and I've swapped it out for 24.04. Haven't really configured it or done much of anything yet. As you can see, the message of the day is still showing here. Those are all some interesting topics. Other topics that I'd like to cover too is setting up your machines. I think that's always something that you do at once, and then you forget what you did, and then it can be really frustrating later when you're trying to remember or trying to help someone else. So let's head over to the Blazor AuthFromScratch repository. And I just want to double check that I'm up to date with what's, yeah, it looks like I am. Looks like I'm completely up to date with what's going on in Origin. And, you know, I really need a pretty log. I really need like a pretty log command ready to go. And I don't have one, and that's my fault. And so what I'm going to do is I actually have one copied here. If I do this, then I can see that I have a pretty clean, even showing the graph, like it's not that big a deal. We're seeing, would this have looked better in command, I wonder? I want to double check. So let's go to BlazorAuthFromScratch here in command, and then let's copy this in. No, it's pretty much the same. And that's because I don't think I have any branching in this repo at all. What if I go to the commits? Yeah, I don't feel like I have a whole lot of branching going on yet. Not that the Git log is that helpful there. So the GitHub log, that is. So some of the things that I'd like to do is let's take a look at this repo here and say, you know, if we don't have, if we maybe go ahead and let's try to sort this out a little bit. Let's create a source folder, and let's move, well, let's open the source folder, and we'll create another folder, and I'm going to call this server, and then go back a couple. And I'm going to take the source code, which is basically all of this, except maybe license. Let's take this source code. Let's move it over to server. Okay. And then let's go back to the source section, and we will create one for WebAssembly. And we're going to clean this up a little bit and start having the repo show these different scenarios. I also think that we can provide some README documentation here. That would be very helpful. So let's we're going to start in WebAssembly. So this is the path that I want to do this work in. I may have to clean it up a little bit later, but why don't we open Visual Studio? Now let's show you, let's see, client from scratch. This is some stuff that I was working on. We're actually going to try to get back to where I was. I did a little bit of looking into this, but I didn't complete it. So we are going to have a brand new Visual Studio window, and let's go ahead and open another project that I'm going to bring over and show you. So this is a client reference project. And if you're wondering how I created this, this was created by, I did use Visual Studio to create this. And this, I said I wanted global WebAssembly and I wanted individual accounts. So like, why do this? And the reason is that so that I can see what they did in the template. And since we've already become kind of, we've kind of gotten the handle of what here is required for the minimum implementation and what isn't. And I think we're going to keep pushing towards this implementation. Don't get me wrong. There are some other things that we haven't done that I think we should do and will be very helpful. And in future shows, I think we're going to implement an iUser store and an iUser manager and so that we can use the user manager and use the role manager. We've had some other help here. We've got the Lanky Scottish Nerd saying good day. Good day to you. Thank you for joining us. And then we have this question here. I want to implement the revalidate server authentication in Blazor server and an API with JWT as a class in the new Blazor auto render template. So there's a lot in that question. And there's so many folks that that I think what you're asking here, and I apologize. I'm going to go ahead and say the first part of the username here, but and if I'm saying it incorrectly, I apologize. But Shaban here is saying, I think the part of the questions here is that I have a Blazor server app, and the server app's going to call an API, and I think what you're saying is that you want this authenticated user's access to flow to the API. Notice I didn't say the word token. Notice I didn't say specifically what it is, but I think what you're saying is I want this authenticated user. I want to know who they are when it goes to the API, when a call goes to the API. Therefore, the API can then authenticate. It can authorize more correctly because it won't be authenticating. We've already authenticated them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to flow that authentication. That API will be able to authorize and say, oh, yes, this user making this API call is allowed to do that. I think that's your question. And we have not yet covered the second step of this, which I think is really important. Great, I've got a website. What website in the world is not going back to APIs? So that's a pretty important thing. Now, we're going to use this as a reference, but it's going to be mostly off screen. Some of your objections to why you don't want to use the templates it very simply could be this, is maybe you don't want to use Entity Framework. I'll just pick that up. And if you use these extension methods, such as the add DB context and the add identity core, add Entity Framework stores, you're going to be using Entity Framework for this. And so part of what we've done is we've broken down what these extension methods do so that we can just pull out what we need. I think where we want to get to, using the sign-in manager. I really do. We have not been using it. And the sign-in manager it's a pretty helpful piece of tool. Or as maybe some of our friends across the pond might say, this is a really helpful piece of kit, this add sign-in manager. The reason I say that is I've actually been interested in the T20. I'm probably saying this totally wrong. The T20 cricket that is being hosted partially here in the US. I am no cricket expert by any means, but I think it's fascinating. And limited overs cricket is actually something that I can watch a video and sort of push through it. And because of that awesome sidebar or that bottom bar, I can see, oh, look, the other team, they took a wicket. Let me roll back and see what happened. Or wow, the score really popped up. So that over must have been like a lot of sixes or something. So to my American friends who have no idea what I just said, actually a really, really cool sport. But, I'm a hockey guy, so I'm already playing sports that are a little odd for many Americans. So let's create a new project, and we are going to, let's see how far we can get here. We're going to make a Blazor web app. .NET Aspire went general release, general availability at build last week. And believe me, my co-host Rich Ross is and I are really looking forward to working with Aspire more. I don't know that we were necessarily waiting for it to go to general availability, but so we're going to put this in here. I may have to move this around a little bit later, but in our WebAssembly folder, we're going to say Blazor Auth from scratch. It's going to be a long file name. We may want to refactor or redesign or rename all of these file names another time. I have no problem with that. And for now, I'm going to not check this place solution and project in the same directory button. I may go back on that just to keep things compact for you. I want authentication type none because remember, we are Blazor Auth from scratch. We'll go ahead and do WebAssembly global. We'll include the sample pages. We're in .NET 8.0. I also got a follow-up question. I want it because I open many tabs and log out, check the authentication, and log out from all open tabs. Yeah, that I love that you asked that question, because this may be a pain point for many of you working in enterprise. Is very often, and when I say working in enterprise, you know what I say? You went to work and you're working for your job using ASP.NET Core. A lot of times I really like to focus on what you can take to work, because don't get me wrong, we love what we're doing. We love coding for fun. But I don't know that a lot of material really thinks about what you have to get done at work. And this is a common requirement. This is a common requirement that when a user logs out in one place, the access should no longer function on other tabs. And this is actually a much more involved problem than it sounds. Yes, you have to invalidate access tokens and invalidate maybe cookie sessions. That's the easy part. Sometimes you might have requirements for how does that look on the end user screens. And it turns out there are things you can do. Nothing is foolproof. And I think if any auditor tries to tell you, I want to guarantee that that every other client tab logs out, it's like, well, that's fine as long as those tabs haven't been tampered with. Because don't forget, client-side code is on your user's machine. It's not on yours. But certainly there are techniques where you could where we could explore there. So we have our brand new project. If we run this, we're going to go ahead and build this project right now and run it and make sure this all gets set up. So no, those are great questions. And I'm sorry that we're not going to tackle those today, but they give us a good place to go. And so, you know, there's never a shortage of topics. I sometimes am a little surprised as to how long we have talked about Blazor authentication on this channel. But, you know, it turns out that it's, you know, this has been happening to me lately, where when I run the app for the first time, a bound blank comes up and then it never switches over. Is that happening to any of you? And do you think it might be a Visual Studio issue, or is it just me? It could just be me. I tend to not have those kinds of mystery issues, and I tend to not like having them, because if there's one thing I don't like, it's what I call voodoo, where I don't understand why something's happened. So all we have is our home and our counter page, and then the demonstrating the weather component. That's fine. Let's get some form of authentication going. So there are a couple ways to do this. I tend to favor what's kind of like a red-green refactor approach, where I break it, you know, and where I basically break it and I say, okay, let's figure out what has to be done next. So if you've been following us, in fact, why don't I open the current Blazor auth from scratch that's in the server folder? Let's open this, and for one thing, make sure it works. This is opening in Visual Studio Preview. I don't know if I meant to do that. I think it should be fine. You don't see any reason why it shouldn't work. But after that opens, let's bring that over. While we're waiting, we have Carl Lindquist with a question. I've done a project with Blazor Auto. I'm a little confused with render modes. I've tried to do a page with uninitialized async, but there seems to give me an error. Do you think you can explain? Okay. We'll have to recreate this. Now, I have struggled through how render modes work with Blazor and Blazor Auto. I think we might have, wow, it's going back a little ways, where we tried using InteractiveAuto for the first time. And there is a strangeness where it feels like the client project components have to initialize separately from the server project components. But we'll have to see specifically. I'm sure there are scenarios where I could create the client side kind of blowing up. But today we are just going to be in WASM, so interactive WebAssembly, not Auto. We know Auto's somewhere we have to go with this. So in Blazor Auth from scratch, we just have one project. And the project everything here is a little easier because all the pages and all the components are here. They're in one project. It just keeps things a lot simpler, right? And obviously, here's our result in Blazor Auth from Scratch is that the particular web browser profile that I'm in, Google should work for this. So I can log in with Google, and you're logged in as the DevTalkShow, and I can log out, and now I'm logged out. And the other thing I can do is I can literally put any name I want in here because this is not actual production-ready authentication, but it really does sign me in as far as ASP.NET Core is concerned. It's interesting that it's struggling. Did it blow up on me? Exception of type. Oh, the navigation exception. That's so interesting that this feels to me like it's rearing its ugly head again. I think that there is an exception setting where it's not ignoring that navigation exception, which is standard server side. That's standard for that navigation exception to be thrown. I'm going to have to look into why Visual Studio is pausing on that when it was not doing that previously. So as you can see, I'm logged in. I can log back out. Okay. So let me come back to Carl's question real quick. This is a good question. I apologize that I don't have an answer for you today, except what I've already said is that when you say it seems to give me an error, what I don't know is what specifically the error is. And I'm not trying to beg out of your question. I love your question. And whether it's related to is the component trying to use a service that's server side? Is the component trying to use authentication and it's not set up quite correctly? Is the component maybe trying to use parameters that haven't gotten persisted down to the client side of InteractiveAuto? And the first time through, InteractiveAuto might have rendered on the server, and the second time it might have rendered on the client. That portion of InteractiveAuto can be really confusing and even maybe a bit frustrating. So I don't really need this server side anymore. Let's focus on our client side approach. When I ran this application, actually I did run it. So let's run it again. Let me level set where we're at because I've said a lot in the last few minutes. This is the Blazor AuthFromScratch Wasm project that we just created. We've done nothing. We did not include authentication, but we would like to. We would like to include authentication. Let's see how far we can get in the time we have remaining before our morning stand-up. So the first thing I would do is in the client application, I need that the pages are here on the client side, including this home page. So let's go ahead and open the home page. And it just says, welcome to your new app. There's really not much going on here at all, in fact. So what we're going to start with, and this is intentionally to break it, is if I wanted this home page to show a login form when you are not authorized and show who you are when you are authorized, show your name, the way I can do that is with an AuthorizeView. So, and it sounds like we might be getting some noise here from outside. It is a gorgeous day here where I'm at, and so my windows are open. And so if I just try to create the AuthorizeView component, Copilot's coming in and giving me some suggestions. And I actually think this isn't a bad suggestion. I just don't need all of this right now. So I'm going to go ahead and tab to accept the suggestion. And but we don't need all this. Let's just simply have this say you're not signed in. So when you're not signed in, it's just going to let us know that. All right. And when you are signed in, we're going to get your username out of the context. But yet, what's interesting, though, is the reason I called this a red-green refactor approach is I know this isn't going to work. So it blew up, right? It's already telling me like the name context doesn't exist in the current context. If I try to run this, I expect this to, it didn't even build. Doesn't even build, right? So what's the problem? Yep. So sorry, can't build this Razor page. I can't help you here. So why is this not working? Well, I've got a little green squiggly that's saying, I found a markup with the AuthorizeView unexpected. What do you mean unexpected? AuthorizeView is in the box. Like, why AuthorizeView? If I go to all these other templates, I can use AuthorizeView anytime I want. So why isn't this working? The reason it's not working is that AuthorizeView depends on a authorization state context being passed down to this component, being cascaded to this component. And if you inspect very carefully, if you inspect, is this the one I want? No. I told you that I created a reference. If we inspect the reference, this is if you create the project with individual accounts and global WebAssembly. Let's go to app.razor. I'm sorry, routes.razor, and routes.razor has an authorized route view. Instead of just the plain old route view, there is a different component called the authorized route view. Well, now hold on. Let's go look at my project. Okay, I'll kind of put this over here a little bit out of the way so that I can go to routes.razor, and I just have a regular old route view. And what does the route view do? The route view displays page components inside Blazor by routing requests to the component. If you've picked for home, are you just going to slash, or maybe no, or are you going to slash home? For counter, are you going to slash counter? For weather, are you going to slash weather, or all your other routes? So that's the job of this router component. Its job is to route your view. And if you say, well, who's using the routes component? Well, we can drop all the way back to app.razor, and app.razor is using the routes component. So this looks like plain old, good old HTML that we're used to, but it's got two Blazor components in it, routes and head outlet. And frankly, most of the magic of Blazor is enabled by these components that know how to turn around and render the page you want to view and its associated components, or the updates to the head section of your app. Most often, you're using this to update the title, but you can update other things too. It's, that's why there's these two components. This is the other piece that makes Blazor go, the Blazor web client-side code that is giving you that spa feel by updating components without a page refresh. So now that we've kind of laid the foundation, routes builds on app, and your home.razor builds on routes. The problem is I don't have a route view that supports authorization. So let's go ahead and use, sorry, picked the wrong screen. I did not mean to. Let's take some inspiration from client reference, and we're going to use the authorized route view. So all we have to do is drop that in. The authorized route view, though, is already complaining, saying, wait a second, I can't find, where's authorized route view come from? Like, this component doesn't seem to know about any of the authorized components. And so let's go figure out why that is. And once again, we will turn to the client reference, which is just me creating a new project with global WebAssembly and individual accounts turned on. And where we want to go is we want to go to imports.razor, okay, in the client app. Why the client app? Because routes.razor lives in the client in a WebAssembly app. So when I open imports.razor, the important one that I'm looking for, I want to say, let's go open imports.razor over here. That might make it easier to spot. I hope that I'm right about it being in the client. I could be wrong. Oh, yes, there is one extra. There's one extra piece here. It is this one. This is the missing using Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components authorization is missing when you don't ask for an authorization template. But the authorized route view comes out of this component. So let's go ahead and add that. And we'll go ahead and add it to our imports as well. So just so you can see where I've done this, that's in the client project, okay? I'm in the client project's imports, and I'm adding authorization. But now I have another problem. And the problem is, well, wait a second, this namespace doesn't exist. Well, what do you mean it doesn't exist? Well, it turns out there's a NuGet package that we're going to want to get to enable WebAssembly authorization. So I will click Manage NuGet packages. In fact, let me click it on the client app, although I don't know that. I think I could have done this from the solution level as well. When I say Manage NuGet packages and we look at what's installed, we see, well, for one thing, we see this very key one, Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components WebAssembly. But let's go take a look at our client reference app again. We're going to keep learning from this reference. And we will right-click and pick Manage NuGet Packages. And we're going to see one more key package right here, Microsoft ASP.NET Components WebAssembly Authentication. This component is what's going to enable the authorize. It contains the authorize route view component, which then enables us to use the authorize. So like just by doing one thing, adding an authorize view component, we see the foundation that it's built on, and it goes back several steps. So I could have, at the same time, I could have done this presentation the opposite direction. And I shouldn't call this a presentation. That's not what this is at all. I could have done this in the opposite direction. I could have said, okay, folks, let's start with a plain project, and now let's add this NuGet package, and now let's change this to an authorized route view. And then but I think by doing it in this reverse order, what I hope you've seen is that we can figure out what is required by looking at the project that we want to get closer to. And that's what's great about ASP.NET Core, in my opinion, is so much more is open and so much less is magic. I'm not going to try and sit here and tell you that it's always that way, but many times I find that we can figure things out. So let's install this. And I'm probably going to get the update. Every yes. Oh, yes, I totally accept all of those agreements. And now let's head back to imports.razor. And that little squiggly went away. There, it took a second for it to go retrieve the package and figure it out. Squiggly's gone. The red squiggly, that's what we like to call them, meaning that the IDE has detected an error. This is now lighting up what this component is. It's telling us that, I really wish that it wouldn't have gone away there. I kind of liked that. I was kind of hoping that when we zoom in, we could see it. Yeah, there we go. So now we can see that the authorized route view is a part of Microsoft at ASP.NET Core.components.authorization, the NuGet package we just added. So here it is. And it combines the behavior of an authorized view and a route view. It puts these together so that way you can still do your routing, and you also get authorization even here in the routes component. So you could either display the routable page, or if the user isn't authorized, then we're going to show something else. We're going to show something instead. Now, the second paragraph here is very important, very important. Additionally, this component supplies a cascading parameter of type task, which makes the user's current authentication state available to descendants. What a mouthful, right? What it's really telling you is it just enabled authentication state context. It just enabled that down in the components that are going to be routed to by this, which is all of them. And so remember that little line of code I wrote, hello context.name? That code is no longer going to have an error. Let's go take a look. Let's back out of here. Hopefully I do this correctly. Great. Awesome. Last time, you folks might remember, maybe it was last time, it was the time before, I got stuck in Zoom It for a little bit. That was always fun. So I come back here and I am no longer getting an error that says, I don't know what context is. I'm also no longer seeing a red squiggly that says it's lit up. It's blue. This is blue now, right? I am getting a different message that you might be dereferencing a null reference, and that's true. Identity could be null here. You could have a user context with no identity, and that could be null. It's not likely to be null, and here's why. If it was null, you shouldn't get into the authorized part of the component. So I think that's why GitHub Copilot was okay with putting this code here. But if you're a little bit like me and you like to see everything clear, I can use this operator to say, okay, if identity is null, then the whole thing is null. And if the whole thing is null, Blazor isn't going to blow up. Blazor just won't render anything, right? So Blazor's kind of ready for that. So now that I've done all this, can I run the application now? Or do we have more issues? And I suspect it's going to be more issues. Now, this is something I forgot to disable before I started. I am using the symbol source, and I did blow up as I thought it would. I am using the Microsoft symbol source. And what I like about doing that is so that way, if I'm stepping through my own code and my own code's about to call Microsoft code, I can just keep stepping right through and I can learn a lot about what this code does. Okay. So, why does it blow up? It says, I can't provide a value for the property authentication state provider to cascading authentication state. Nobody registered an authentication state provider. Wow, that's a big mouthful, but what does it mean? It means that when this component, which is implicitly, we're not seeing this happen. This component from the authorized route view is getting a cascading authentication state. It's supposed to be sending that down. But something happened. It couldn't find one. And so the whole thing just exploded. But we got a pretty helpful exception. I mean, that exception isn't telling you exactly what to do, but it's kind of leading us the right direction. And the reason is that, once again, if we head over to the reference application, and which when I call this the reference application, just in case you're joining late, what I really mean is the application that you file new project and it works. Now, notice that we get this add authorization core, which this is different from server side. If we head over to the implementation, we are now looking at, we're using source link, right? And I'm using the source server. This is letting me step right into what is in the authorization DLL. So they add several services here. They add a service for authorization, policy, handler, authorization evaluator, pass-through authorization. There's a lot going on with this. And it's just so interesting that my question has been, do we need more of this on the server side? And are we going to actually come back to this later and say, hey, we should really just add authorization core? But in order to learn, what we're going to do instead is we're going to try to do the minimum and see how that works. So let's head back over to program.cs. But we're going to start on the client side program.cs, which is so minimal. There's not a whole lot going on here. It turns out that we have to actually start on the server side here. So let's head over to the server side and say program.cs. And because this is a file new project template that did not have any authentication, it's very small and it doesn't mention authentication at all. The only thing it does is it adds Razor components, which is server-side rendering, which all Blazor applications have. And then let's add interactive WebAssembly. Okay. Now, why you might be asking, how do I know if the components are being rendered interactive WebAssembly? Well, you have two clues. You have two clues. One clue is that all of these pages are declared and implemented in the client project. And one of the things about Blazor is if your component needs to run client side at all, then it's got to be implemented in the client project generally. When I say general, I don't even want to say generally speaking. That's just how it works. Okay. So I almost kind of made the mistake of throwing that language in there. And then people might say, well, what do you mean generally speaking? So, but on the server side is where we're going to do authentication. So let's add, oh, I think this is kind of what I want. Almost. I want to add an authenticate. I want to basically create a new service of type authentication state provider. It needs a using directive, which I think we're going to get very quickly. Yep. Just say add on. So boom, that lights right up. But now what authentication state provider? And we, in several recent episodes, we have been using the server authentication state provider, and that's in the box. That's part of Blazor. It's just built in, which is nice, except the problem is that what we need here is we need something that's going to prep the WebAssembly portion of this. So we can't really use the server authentication state provider. It only manages the HTTP context and the server authentication for the server side. How am I going to get that? How am I going to let the WebAssembly side know who is logged in? And let's, once again, we'll return to our reference project and to get some inspiration here. And if we go to program CS on the client side, which has a lot more stuff going on, they have a persisting server authentication state provider. So what they're saying is it's still a server authentication state provider, but it's going to set up for the client. It's going to persist the results of that authentication so that WebAssembly will know what's happened. Where is this code? If I hover over it, I can see that this says class client reference components.account. Client reference is the name of this project. So hold on a second. Unlike the authentication state provider, which you can see comes from Microsoft ASP.NET Core, components authorization, this is code in the reference project. Oh, I had no idea that I was a proud owner of some new code. Well, let's go find it. And here it is. It's in the server project in components under account. I'm not 100% sure it has to be here, but we are going to steal this. So the way we're going to do it is we are quite literally going to I've just copied it to the clipboard, and we are going to head back to our project. We're going to break this down and make some decisions as to whether we want to keep all of it, some of it. I'm going to go ahead and follow their pattern for now. We could change our mind later, but in the components account folder, we're going to add a new class and persistent, I think it was called the persistent server authentication state provider. And if I have this wrong, we'll just fix it. So here it is, except we're going to, excuse me just a moment. I think a little bit of that problem that I was having last weekend is kind of fighting me a little bit. So I'm going to leave the blank implementation here just for a second while I paste in everything else. And let's see what we have to change. Well, for one thing, our project is called BlazorAuthFromScratch. It's not called client reference. So let's change the namespace and let's change the using. The rest should be fine. So let me double check that this is the persisting server authentication state provider. So let's actually go ahead and rename this. And that makes sense because this provider is persisting for the client. It's not persistent, it's persisting. It's going to make the difference. So I wanted to change that name. Notice that it derives from the server authentication state provider, and it also implements iDisposable. So we can get rid of this now, in my opinion, I believe. And I think we're okay. The only thing that's different is I expect this to complain like, do you want me to change the file name? And I am going to say, yes, let's change that file name. So that way the file name matches persisting server. And how did I, I did that pretty quickly. If I change the name of this class, this little tooltip's going to come up again. It's right here. It was interesting because it was over there earlier. And it's asking, well, do you want to rename this file? And in this particular case, no, I don't want to rename the file. So what does this thing do? This thing, when it is constructed, it hooks into a on authentication state changed event. That event is an event that is thrown not necessarily by server authentication state provider, but further up in the framework, something is going to fire off the on authentication state changed event whenever the authentication state is changed. That sounds really obvious, right? And so when it does change, we have a method here that does nothing more than says, well, that method provides a task of authentication state. maybe that task is completed, right? Maybe it's a completed task. We already know the authentication has changed somehow. Let's just save that off. We're just going to save it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to register on persisting, okay? So what does register on persisting do? Well, let's look at the tooltip. Register a callback. Oh, I was hoping that would stay up. Register a callback to persist the component state when the application is about to be paused. And then it says some other stuff here. Registered callbacks can use this opportunity to persist their state. So let's back off here so we can read the rest of it maybe at full screen. So that it can be retrieved when the application resumes. Okay, it would be very interesting to kind of understand the circumstances about when this is called, such as moving to another tab, because a lot of our browsers now deactivate tabs and maybe even deactivate connections. So that could be problematic. And what we're registering is a method called onPersistingAsync. OnPersistingAsync is the important one. This is the important method that says, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the user principal that we have here on the server side, if it's authenticated, and I am going to pull out of that user principal some claims. I'm going to pull out the user ID claim type, and I'm going to pull out the email claim type. And as long as they're not null, I'm going to persist those as JSON in a persistent component state. So let's come back up. What the heck is that? Well, persistent component state is a part of Blazor that was passed into this authentication state provider using dependency injection. So when it's passed in, as you can see, it comes from Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components, the state for the components and services of a components application, which is a fancy way of saying a Blazor application. So this persistent component state is something that the Blazor side is going to be able to look at later. But the problem is we don't have one of these user info types. Okay, so let's head back over to our reference. And look, they have a user info type. Where is that at? Well, if I hover over it, you're going to see that that's part of the project. It's code that you own. It's not. And let's use the Solution Explorer's. I like this button, Sync with Active Document button. I like this button. I click on this button, and it shows me, it zooms right to where this user info is. It's in the client. Kind of interesting. It's in the client side of this world. Okay. So, yeah, we can use this, but we're actually going to strip it down a little bit. We only need the user ID. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, and let's take it back to BlazorAuthFromScratch. And just like they did, we're going to add it to the client side. And we will call it user info just like they did. Perhaps in the future, we'll want to change some of this, but for now. So here's user info, and we're just going to actually, let's do what we did last time where we'll copy it in this way because we know that we would much rather use that namespace. Now we can get rid of the original. I don't necessarily, I mean, we can leave the comment here for now, add properties to this class, and update the server and client providers to expose more information about the authenticated user. And what they mean is if you want to add more information that the client app needs to know about your WebAssembly portion, you add it here. Right now, we only have a user ID. That's it. We just have a user ID. So we're just going to have one property. Okay. So if we just have one property, I also am going to want to get rid of this. Don't need it. Thanks to a somewhat recent C#, I don't remember which C#, I don't have to change. I don't have to get rid of that trailing comma. So I'm not going to. This is a var, which obviously I'm not going to find. I'm not going to find this. And I'm just going to say if the username is not null. So we've stripped this down a little bit where all we're doing is we're checking to see, is there a signed in user? And if there is, let's get their name out of their claims. And after we do that, let's persist it for the client side. Okay. So now that we've done all of this, this app still may not build. Oh, this app did build. It did build. I don't expect that it's going to have any noticeable effect. In fact, I'm still not 100% sure that it's going to run. We did add authentication. No, we blew up. So we do not have an authorization policy provider. Okay. Without an authorization policy provider, the authorized route view doesn't work. So where do we get an authorization policy provider? Here's where this could get interesting. Let's see. We have, you know why? We added the authentication state provider, but we did not add authorization. Okay, we haven't done that yet. So let's add authentication, and I'm not going to add authentication core for now. Let's just do this. I don't know that this is enough. No, in fact, it didn't seem to have any effect. So now we are going to add authorization as well. And let's take some inspiration from BlazorAuthFromScratch, which is our server-side implementation of this. What we're going to do is kind of double check our progress. And when we add authentication, I think for now, don't have to add the cookie just yet. So, and we're not going to add Google or Microsoft accounts today. We only have about 15 minutes left. So let's see if this is enough to get the app running. It certainly will not authenticate. But do we know that the app, and yes, so the app is running. And not only is the app running, this is correctly determining that you're not signed in. Now it blows up. An unhandled error occurred. I'm curious what that is. And is it going to happen every time? It might. Yeah, look at that. It keeps on. That's not, so that's interesting. And it makes me wonder, is it client side only, or is this something that we're going to cure? Okay, so add authorization. Now, we are going to need to get moving pretty quickly and see if we can try and get some of this done before we run out of time today. So let's see if we can implement. Let's see if we can implement the login component. And can we do enough to get this signed in? Again, I have to figure out why in Visual Studio, and I want to admit this feels sudden. The navigation manager, Navigate to, it's not crashing, but it's throwing an exception, and Visual Studio is pausing on it. And I don't feel like it was doing that earlier. So what do we need? We need a login component, okay? So we're going to, the login component, oddly enough, this is going to be real interesting. I feel like the login component has to be server side, which makes me feel like the login page has to be server side. We might have to really stop and think about how a client maybe could have a client side form that then calls to a server side service. But that's not going to happen very quickly today, because there's some definite work to look into to make that happen. So let's do this. Let's see if we can create a login Razor component. And look, this is where we've only got 10 minutes left. I'm not sure that we will complete this today. I'm just being honest. And that's what we'd said at the beginning here. So we have a login component, and it's on the server side. This will be the page to log in. Okay. And if I think about our app.razor, yes, our app.razor, because we are in global interactive WebAssembly, was our rendering choice. Notice that all the way up at the routes section, we have render mode equals interactive WebAssembly all the way up here. So I think even though I've put a login Razor here, I wonder if this is going to work out for us, or is it going to blow up because it's going to say, wait a second, I'm not running any of this server side code. Let's add this to routes. I'm sorry, not routes.razor. Layout, nav menu. Okay. So if we go to the nav menu, and we might have to also take a look at how the auth section is working. See, this isn't going to work if I but let's prove it. You know what? We're here to learn. We're here to learn. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to add a fourth link. and we're going to say the href is login. So that means when somebody clicks on this link, it tries to go to the login page. So let's go back to our login Razor component. And like all good little Razor components, it's going to have page components that we want to render. Let's put login here. Okay. And I have a feeling that when this runs, it's not going to work. I think it's going to blow up sky high. I think it's going to build, but I think the client side, this client side nav menu, which is in the Blazor AuthFromScratch Wasm client project, I think when it tries to run this login component that's in the server side project, I think it's going to say, I can't find it. I can't do what you're asking. Okay, it's willing to load the app. It can load the app, it can take the reservation, but can it hold the reservation? Let's click login. Look at that. It still worked. It still worked. This will be, oh, now look what happened. It's like blinked. It blinked and it said not found. Okay. I think we just stumbled across a case of server-side rendering coming in and rendering, and then client-side rendering blowing sky high. Can we prove that? And this might be the last thing we get done today, which, you know, I know folks hopefully are okay. Let's see. Do I want on initialized async, or can I use on initialized? I think I can go ahead and use on initialized, but the problem is I'm not getting any IntelliSense help here. I would like some IntelliSense help here. Protected. Yes, thank you. This is actually exactly what I'm looking for. Thank you very much. In fact, that is exactly what I'm looking for, because I want to use a little trick to see if we can figure out which page the login page is on and which page at each. And I also want to set a breakpoint. So let's run the app again. Okay. And I expect to see the home page. And now I'm going to click login. Here we are. We are on a breakpoint. I'm going to hit F10 to step through it. Now, where did that console write line write? Let's check. Where is the app? Here it is. Here's the app. What I mean is where's the app window? Here it is. And as you can see, login page initialized was written here. If you aren't familiar with where console write line writes, when you're on server side, it writes to your app standard out. When you're client side, meaning you're running in WebAssembly, it writes to the browser. So before I release this breakpoint, let's come back to the browser and let's open the developer tools. You know, why don't you just always open the dev tools? My dog must think there's something going on outside. Okay, and let's shrink this down a little bit and make sure that we can see the console. Okay, nothing in the console, nothing up my sleeve, right? Now let's let this thing run. Let's let it run. And its breakpoint is hit again. The breakpoint's hit again because we have already server-side rendered. We're in the login. We're in the, we tried to go to login. We're already server-side rendered, except that I think we hit this breakpoint. And so you can see my app is stuck. It's kind of stuck trying to figure it out. But now it's going to do console write line again because you know why? It's initializing this on the WebAssembly side. I don't know, Carl, if this is helping, because your question earlier was about like, why are you getting errors? Notice that server-side rendering happens first by default, and then it tries to render it again client-side. You can change that behavior if you want. Okay, so I've run through that. Let's head back. And it did not print to the console here. And I just wonder if that's because I've got it held. Let's see. It's still paused in the debugger. No, there it goes. But I really wanted to see console. You know, and it never loaded the login side. It never loaded it. And you know why I think that might be? It could be that the home page sort of grabbed this. because the client side maybe couldn't find a route, because the client side doesn't have a login page, right? So we got, let's see what we got. We got the server side initialized several times for some interesting reason. I think Blazor was trying to figure out how to render this thing, but it's not going to work in a client app. We can't have our login page working in the client app. So that experiment doesn't work. I haven't been able to check just to make sure we haven't gotten any more comments. So that experiment didn't work. And I guess we should have known that, because if you create your own global WebAssembly with individual accounts, you're going to see the auth page is sitting in the client. It's not sitting. The only page sitting on the server side is the error raiser page. This is the only one. So that this particular method isn't going to work for us, which is fine. So what we're going to do then is we're going to move this page. Let's move this page, right? Let's move it. And I think I should be able to just grab it and move it down to pages. And then what it does is it copies it. Okay. And I suppose I can just delete this one because I'm not going to use it. And we'll say this will be the page to log in, and it's the page is called login. I think what we'll do is I think we'll go ahead and put an AuthorizeView in here. And we're going to say you are already logged in. Okay. And that's if you're authorized. So how does this thing? Yeah, I was actually hoping. Yeah, thanks for helping. I appreciate that, GitHub Copilot. In fact, still helping. Still kind of helping me with what I want. And then I don't really want I want not authorized. Yep. Not authorized, and you're not signed in. Yeah, helpful. That was actually good. Oh, I lost it. And I forgot what the context key is. Is it control dot? No. There's a context key that says, hey, run, tell me what Copilot said again. I don't remember what it was. So let's see now that we've done this. Now that we've done this, can I start this login page? Or can I run the app and kind of get a reasonable result, even if we can't log in yet? Okay, so hello world, you're not signed in, but that's on the home page. Let's head over to login. And it's just really not too happy about this, right? This will be the page to log in. You are not logged in. And then an error occurs. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that we're going to have to take some steps back and maybe not be as stubborn as you know that I tend to be with not using the stuff that's built into the templates. And again, for folks who maybe have been following this journey, the point of this journey is so that we can really understand how authentication works, right? And I got my answer about alt. So let's try that. Let's say that I didn't have this, and I was coming here, and I start typing, and I go, oh no, I really wish I had what Copilot was going to do. So it was alt. The lanky Scottish nerd. I didn't mean to kill that. Says alt. Thank you. I got to remember that shortcut. I got to learn that shortcut and remember it. So perfect. All right. I did kind of lose train of thought there. Sorry about that. If you've been following along, you know that I am very stubborn about not using the extension methods because I don't want to add stuff that I'm not aware of. Like I want to know what's going into this stew, so to speak. And while we were able to get the app started with add authorization, add authentication, let's compare this real quick to BlazorAuthFromScratch, the server implementation that we have been using for a while. And notice that all I had to do here was just say add authorization, add authentication. I don't know that I really have to add the default scheme. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue might really be that on the server side, you might not need all of those providers that we're seeing in Add Authentication Core. So when I open what is the, now this is a different app. I know we're hopping around from a lot of different implementations. This client reference that I'm about to bring over, oh, I accidentally closed programs. Yes. This says Add Authorization Core. Let's go and take a peek back on the server side real quick and see what's getting added server side. It is only Add Authorization, Add Authentication. Okay. And then the schemes are getting set. So on the server side, we're only doing Add Authorization, Add Authentication. I wonder if we have to have this on the server side. Do we have to have Add Authentication Core in order to set up the I said that wrong a few seconds ago. In order to set up the WebAssembly side of this so that it can reach out and listen to the authentication state provider. In fact, we have not even implemented the persistent authentication state provider. That could be the source of all of our issues here. So let's go ahead and come back to our project real quick, just in the last few minutes. And I'm going to close all of these windows basically so that we can sort of reset our thinking. Once again, server side project, client side project. On the server side project, I seem to be following along with the reference where I really only need this to get going. But on the client side, they are using an extension method called Add Authentication Core. So let's go ahead and let's drop that in. Okay, Add Authorization Core. Is this enough? Is this enough? Let's enough to get things going. I actually do believe that we're going to need the rest of this. We're especially going to need the persistent authentication state provider, because without it, I think what's happening is I think it's not able. It'd be nice to go and take a look at these exceptions. We're gonna have to figure out how to look at them. But I have a feeling that what's happening is this app just simply isn't. In fact, see how it's blowing up here? We're actually getting the help right here. Look at this. We're getting the help. So where did I go for help? An unhandled error has occurred. I hit F12. I'm looking in the console. We're getting the answer. Cannot provide a value for authentication state provider because over on the client side, we haven't registered an authentication state provider. So I think that's what's happening here. I think that's the issue. So it's already 9:02, but let's see if we can just cut and paste this in. Let's get an authentication state provider service added to the client side. And we're going to need a new, is there a refactoring where it's going to make a class for me? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Let's do that. Create that in a new file. The question is, where did you put it? Oh, gosh, what did it do? Okay, it put it here. That's fine. Oh, yeah, that all worked. That all did what I wanted. Okay, but let's go double check what our reference app did. Our reference app, remember, unlike the server authentication state provider that comes in the box, quote unquote, the persisting and the persistent authentication state provider is your code. When you build this project, this becomes part of your app, and it's going to live. It's going to live here, and it's going to live here. Okay, it's just sitting in the client section. We've just done the same thing. We need this code, so I'm cutting and pasting it, adding it in here. I don't know how many changes we're really going to make. We need to change the namespace, and the rest of it should be fine. Okay. One thing that's different is we only need the claim from, let's see, claim. Well, that's interesting. Oh, interesting that it's saying name claim types. Is that a bug? Oh, name identifier. Okay. And then claim type name, but it's using user info email. You know, I don't know if I ever noticed that before, but for right now, can I just take, oh, user ID. Okay. So let's only take this claim for now. We just want this to work. We'll figure out the rest of that a little bit later. Okay, so that's fine. Let's build. I guess that makes sense. Where did this get created? Persistent client, good. Just double checking off screen. Yep. Okay, that's all the same. Okay. This is going to build. Can we at least get rid of that loading error at the bottom, even if it doesn't really do what we want? Like the whole thing may not work correctly, but I don't know that we're going to get that unhandled error anymore. And it seems to be smoother, right? We're not signed in. We're not logged in. Okay, that's fine. But when let's bring up the console if we can. I just want you to see the Visual Studio console. Okay. Whoops. Is login still? Login is not writing out here at all, right? Because it's never server side anymore. It's now a full WebAssembly, interactive WebAssembly component. So if I hit F12 and I go to console, login page initialized is writing out here now. See that? Every single time. Every single time. We're getting some info saying that we were not able to use the authenticated user, which is fine, right? That's kind of working the way we expect. It's just funny that it's just yelling at us over and over. But that's working the way we expect. So I think we have a foundation. I think we have a foundation. And I think that foundation is we have a brand new project. We have added to the server side, the server authentic. No, I'm looking at the wrong. No, this is BlazorAuthFromScratch. Oh, I'm not currently using the persisting server authentication state provider. So we're going to want to change that. Okay. Persisting server authentication state provider, which is our own. And that's going to say, I don't know where you're coming from. And we're going to say, that's fine. Let's see. As long as this runs, we'll get out of here. And we'll see if we can even, maybe, I'm not very good at this, but we'll see if we can even raid somebody. So persisting authentication state provider, fine. Let's run it. See if this all works. Okay. You're not signed in. Let's double check what's going on in F12 world. The authorization failing is coming from the info. I'm going to be curious how we deal with that, because I feel like it's not the kind of thing we would want splattering our pages. Then again, it is development, right? We are in development. So we'll think about that. But this seems to be doing what we want. We're not signed in. We're not logged in. But yet the system is prepared for that component, because at the very beginning of this, we couldn't even put the component in place. We couldn't even add it to the home page. We couldn't add it to login. We do not have our own login component yet. That's some work to be done. And I think we're going to have to architect it a little differently from the server side, but we will get that done. And, but I think we have the foundation. We're on the server side. We can implement a persisting authentication state provider. We might have been able to do this without implementing that yet. My order might be a little off here. We certainly need authentication and authorization. We might not have had, oh no, we need some authentication state provider, because otherwise the AuthorizeView component doesn't work. So we needed something. We added authentication, we added authorization. We will customize that later. And on the client side, we needed authorization core. We are going to have to dig into this and understand what is happening here on the client side. This default worked. This all worked just fine. But I'm very interested in wondering what it's doing for us that we don't necessarily need when we do server-side Blazor. So we ran through a lot. I know today definitely feels more like a lab. Let's see where we're at in terms of status, because we made a ton of changes to this project, an absolute ton. So let's, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out a new branch, and we're going to say this is a feature branch, and we are adding Wasm from scratch. Long Look at that. What a long branch name. Okay, so feature adding WASM from scratch. We're going to add, I think I want to say -all. All right. Adding files failed. Huh. I don't know that I want all of these files in here. But we may have to modify this, but I want to get this checked in so that if you happen to know about the repo and you want to look at it later today, you are fine with doing that. There is a ton going in here, though. There's an absolute ton. So I'm going to have to set up stream. I never remember how to do that, so I let Git help me. Okay, so we have now added, let's go take a look at the repo. We'll refresh. We have a new branch, adding WASM from scratch. And adding WASM from scratch, up to date with main. That doesn't make sense. Oh, because I didn't commit anything. Haha. All right. So all I did was push the branch up. That's all I did. I didn't add any of the work that we've done. So let's say first attempt at Blazor auth from scratch in WASM. Let's call it Blazor auth from scratch, not. Okay, and now we have to push that up. And then we'll see it up in GitHub. Did a lot today, didn't we? Just to kind of get the foundation going. And also, this is the path where we're going to start modifying the repo a little bit so that we have multiple projects. We have our server project, we have our WebAssembly. We'll do some cleanup here so that it's not kind of as messy as it is. The server one's a lot cleaner right now. We'll do a little bit of work there. We've got a long way to go. For instance, there's a solution file here, but if you want to look at this today, then we know that it's at github.com, Blazor auth from scratch. Definitely we'll get that in the show notes. And you're going to want to head to the feature branch that we worked on today. So we went through quite a bit. And if you're wondering, is there going to be a show tomorrow? The answer is yes. And a little bit later today, we're going to put that show on the schedule up on YouTube. And I think LinkedIn might schedule it as well. And then we'll see if maybe we tweet about it. So there's the plan is to have a show tomorrow. Hopefully that works out just fine. But we're going to shift gears, and we probably will be going back to .NET Aspire. That just went gold general release. So with that being back, we're going to take a look at that tomorrow, and then we'll figure out what we're doing Friday. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I really appreciate it. And let's see. I know I have to get to my own meeting in just a little bit, and I want to make sure that none of you are missing stand-up. So thank you very much for joining us. Hope that you learned something. I love the questions we got today. I'm really sorry for both of them that it just wasn't the topic for today, but you have given us topics to work on. We got to see if we can get them to you. Carl, I don't know if we helped you at all with the issues you're having with InteractiveAuto and the on-initialized async. You saw me struggle with it a little bit, and it could be because of server-side rendering, could be your issue. It could be because maybe you were trying to use something that's in the server project, in the client project. It's a little bit of a mind bender the first time you use InteractiveAuto because your project could be rendering. It could be your component could be rendering server side. It could be rendering as part of Blazor server. It could be rendering as part of Blazor WebAssembly. And your code has to be ready for all of those scenarios, which makes BlazorAuto a little bit more interesting to use. So for the rest of you, thank you for joining us, and we will see all of you next time on the Dev Talk Show.